Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go and add a little bit of colour to the different elements, divs on our pages. Let's start with the header. So with the header, because it's a normal element, and change the background colour to be a medium kind of a medium grey. So let's just go grey. Let's have a nice grey. Okay. So now on our web page, we've got a grey in there, so we can actually see that element of the web page. Now, if you remember correctly, we also have our main body, welcome div, newsletter. So let's go and do all these. Okay, so you can see that I've obviously made the header background color grey, and then for my main body, welcome div, newsletter, left div and right div, again I've made them all grey. Now, because I don't have elements or things within some of them, you don't actually see them on the page. But if I went back to my index and I put here sort of within a p tag, so left div, okay, so we can actually see this now start to take place, or take shape I should say. And then within right div, let's just add another p tag and then call it right div. And if I go back to my web page, I can refresh. I can see my left div and my right div. And then it'll be the same if I put some elements into my welcome div and also my newsletter div, because I already have something in my welcome div. Now, the reason I've done this is so that we can start putting some design to our web page, and we'll be going forward with that in the next lecture. So continuing on with our web page creation, the next thing I want to do is I want to style this newsletters element. The whole idea of this is that we would have somewhere where we're going to have sign-ups for people to leave their email address, name, etc., saying, you know, register to receive the latest email or the latest newsletter email. So what we would have, we'd have a few input types, and the first input type we might have would be of, say, type text. Its name may be name, for example, where we want someone to enter their name. And then we might want another input type of email. Now, the great thing about this is that by putting a type of email in HTML5, it sort of kind of validates that it is actually an email. If we put something that isn't an email address, then there will be an error about that, and we'll see that when we've actually got this all up and running. And then we might say with the name of this, again, we can call it email just to give it a name consistent. What we might actually want between those is we might actually want a bit of a space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this line break just to put in a break in between a space in between each one of these elements, so that we have a little bit of spacing, a little bit more neatness. And what we might want, we might have again a couple of breaks between this next element, because the next thing we want is a different input type. And what we want this to be is equal to submit. And what submit is actually a submit button. And again, let's just call this submit to be similar. So what that actually has now given us is an input type of text called name, an input type of email called email, and a button called submit. So let's just save that. Go back to our web page. And here we have it. We have our little section. This is where we put, say, our name. This is where we put our email address. And this is where we click the submit button. I'm not going to put the code there's at the back of this within this course. This is just to give you an idea of how to set that up, and then following forward we're going to actually style the page, and that's what this is all about really. This is about all the styling the page. So that's our contact us div with the elements now set up. Okay, so now that we've got all the divs set up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start adding a little bit more styling to the page, putting the elements how I want them, and then I'll talk through that with you. So let's go to my styles. So with my welcome div, I want to make sure the float is left. I want to make them width about 70% of the page. I'm going to add a margin on the right of about 20 pixels. I'm going to add some padding around 15 pixels. So let me just save that. And then now we can see here we have our welcome me to my page over on the left, and then my submit for my newsletter over on the right. And then obviously we have this style in here. What I want to do next is just do some styling to the next elements in the page. Okay, so next let's look at the newsletter, and again let's just put the float left. Let me make the padding to be 15 pixels. I want to set the width to be 20% of the page, and the margin at the bottom to be 50 pixels. Okay. And the other thing I'm going to do very briefly as well is I'm going to go back into my index here, and I'm going to add at this point my div class equals clear, just to clear down the styling at that point, so that we can then not have the float affect my left and right div. So again, let's save all that. And now if we look at my web page, we now have our nice left and right section here, and my div left and right here. What I'm also going to do actually, very briefly is I'm going to go back to my styles and I'm going to just change some of the color here. I'm going to actually make the colors a little bit different. So I'm going to make this one a hash E8088, and I'm going to do the same for my newsletter. And in fact, I'm going to do it for, I'm going to leave my two divs grayed there at the moment, but I may change the colors later on with that as well. And the reason is, now that I've changed the color, you can actually start seeing the difference in the sections. So we have a nice floating section here and a nice floating section there. In fact, I can also go back here and in my welcome div, let me set the margin left, sorry, to be 10 pixels, so that now we can actually see it really floating here. So you can start to see that we actually are making the elements float, and we will be actually doing that with a few more things as we go through by changing some of the colors. In fact, let's go back here and take this color. Let's go to my menu header, and let's just actually add that to there as well, just so we get some nice colors or sort of elements we can see through. And then let's just go back there, and then at the bottom of that we're going to add some margin at the bottom, and let's make that say 30 pixels. Save that. I like to save just in case. And we can start to see we're actually really kind of making some changes to the web page now. We can change the colouring as we go through, but just the fact that we can start to see the floating bits that we've got going on here and the changes that we're making to the page to get it sort of back in with the colour we want. So that's our two elements here sorted, and next we're going to start looking at changing the colours for the elements here and affecting our left and right div. So that'll be in the next lecture.